Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to talk about music today. Cooper is under the presumption that music is a great thing when it's old. Jake thinks it's good that it's new, and I'm warring that music has never been good or bad, and that it's always been a intermediate thing, dependent on who's making it and who's listening to it. Because the fact is, music hasn't gained or lost fundamental qualities over time because human expression, technical innovation, and gatekeeping mechanisms constantly balance each other out. So basically, what that boils down to is because we progress through our eras and we have new creators, we have new equipment, and how it's used, it divulges and diverges into different um, nooks and crannies. And I think you get good music and you get bad music, and it's never been all good or all bad. So over to you, Cooper.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Now, I am arguing that music that is from the older era is far better than the music that we hear today because I feel like any music that you hear today is heavily synthesized and has lots of filters over it, and you're hearing all kinds of stuff which is not clean analog noises that are coming from instruments or humans. Like when you auto-tune something, you are taking away its natural qualities. Over to you, Jake.
So, yeah, I'm here to disagree with that, obviously. First of all, autotune has been used since the 70s, 60s. Autotune has been used on most classic rock songs, most songs from that time. Um, Autotune is one of the most essential effects on use. It's not necessarily an effect as a tool as well, but that's not what I'm here to argue about. I'm mainly here to say that music, like disagreeing with that, obviously, um, requires understanding some important nuances because often people compare the greatest songs from the earlier generations, like, I don't know, Queen, Beatles, Michael Jackson, to the spectrum of music, the entire spectrum of music released today. Um, but that's not even fair because we tend to remember the classics, but forget the countless mediocre, even terrible songs that were out back in that time. So to claim that older music is better, assume that there's an objective or standard for quality. But what does better mean? Is it the lyrics, the vocals, the production quality, the emotional impact, the popularity? You have to define what you mean by better music. Cooper or Kyle, either.
All right. Well, back to autotune. That's a very interesting point because you could agree that yes, it has been used in some of the older music, but take the song "Believe" by Cher, okay? This song, autotune is being used as an effect, not to complement the voice. So basically, you can't hardly hear the voice any, which is I don't think is as good as you take a song like "Stairway to Heaven" by Led Zeppelin, one of the most famous songs. And there is maybe some autotune on that, but it's still you can hear the person's voice, and there's not like this vibrating like lilt throughout the thing that takes away from the voice. Over to you, Kyle.
I think auto tune has been abused by certain artists, specifically like Cher and T-Pain. They've made it their sound rather than using it as a aid to boost their singing from good to excellent. And it's in a way, a disappointment that we've divulged into those paths. But on the other hand, going back even farther than we've previously dived, I don't know what the word for that is. Um, Divin. We go back to the classic era. We have Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin and all those guys. They're all creating music, and I give it most people who watch this video aren't going to even know more than 10 classic composers. And that's just to show that not all classic works were amazing. And yet you have a large portion of the older generation who are fully convinced that the classic era was the only era of good music and that everything that has come out since then is total garbage. And I I personally like a little bit of Beethoven here and there. I'm not so big on Mozart, but that's my opinion. And I'm also a avid fan of Europe and Bon Jovi, but I'm not saying that they're the all-time goats because more recent producers like Alan Walker and one less known, DeTweekes, are also phenomenal producers, and they've come out with some awesome music. And it's not a matter of whether we can say that their music is good or bad. It's better or worse in our opinion because that's what it basically boils down to is our opinion. Jake?
I just want to go back to the example Cooper gave earlier. He said the difference between Believe by Cher and Stairway to Heaven. Stairway to Heaven never charted on the charts ever, while Believe was there for 4 weeks as number one. Um, and Believe sold over 11 million pure copies, whereas Stairway to Heaven was never sold as a standalone single, but the album sold only about 9 million copies. Um, and yeah, Cher has been requested more times on radio dominant so it takes the radio dominance. So just saying that song is more popular, but that's just one specific. And what you Kyle was saying about how T-Pain has maybe abused it. But at the time of T-Pain starting music, that sound had not been heard before. Nowadays we hate the auto-tune style because we hear it so much from artists. We hear sloppy AI, sloppy auto-tune production from so many smaller or not so well-known artists. But T-Pain at the time, we have to remember that he made that sound before anyone else had heard it. That was a new thing. And so you can't really, I mean, yeah, he may have like maybe it's not the raw vocals, yeah, but it was a new thing that had never been heard before, right? So
All right. Okay. So you live in the 70s, all right? You pull out your iPhone, you whip out Spotify, okay? And you search Led Zeppelin, okay? Wrong. You pull out your gramophone and put a record on it, and you might hear it, but you might not even have Led Zeppelin at the time. You might have like the best of Danny Kaye or something else, okay? You have to understand that because internet technology has advanced so much further than like what it was back then, that you're not going to be able to stand behind that point that you made that sure is so much more famous because there was no way other than concerts of Led Zeppelin actually being famous. Kyle?
actually it's called record sold, and that is the standard and has been for years. And there's no difference. Like there's artists from the 80s and 70s and 90s competing with the artists of today, and it's actually very standard. And to say that Believe by Cher has sold more copies than Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven is a concrete evidence that it was a more popular song.
I would side with Jake on the fact that Stairway to Heaven is not as popular as Believe, just because he's got the stats to show it. However, personal opinion on Cooper's side is that he really appreciates the song and enjoys it, and that's full credit to him for his talent and ability to play it on guitar. So I think it's a fair trade-off that he thinks it's a very good song. So I guess what I'm saying is personal opinion is a strong uh component into what we think about music and that kind of stuff. But the record numbers is what really shows us the uh worldwide um, opinion on what's considered good music at the time, and often it's driven by outside factors outside the music industry, such as uh, there was a lot of popular music going around that was fueled by the Vietnam War and the rebellion around that, and there's a few other uh, significant events that we have had happen around the world that totally boost and dwindle the uh, result of the song. I could throw out a few more examples, such as Forever Young, but I won't go into that right now.
Okay, so I want to step back a little further than say 1970s. If you go back to what Kyle was talking about earlier, the era of Beethoven and Mozart and that sort of general time period, you consider some of the artists back then and you can compare them to some of the modern artists, and you could say that they are far more talented than anybody you may have heard of, even like anyone around in this time. You take Beethoven; he was deaf when he wrote the Ninth Symphony. Okay, that is incredible. That's one of the most famous classical pieces that you have ever heard. Okay, a lot of people have like wish they could even produce something that good. Like that's that famous. There's tons of people cranking out music and hoping that they can make something that good nowadays. But people from further back, they didn't have all the computer technology. They didn't have Ableton that they could play their piano into and change the effects and things on. They just had to straight rely on their own talent.
I just want to say one thing that like you're complaining that new music is worse, right? But every generation, you always hear people saying that music isn't what it used to be. Like rock was considered by the older generations to be inferior or dangerous, and rap was dismissed by many people as not being real music. And all these electronic producers have been criticized for being artificial. Yet now, those are all major parts of music history. Maybe the problem isn't that every new generation suddenly gets worse at music. I feel like it's more like the older generations or you are just getting attached to either the music they grew up with or the music you're used to be hearing as the classics that you have been listening to your whole life. It's not so much a matter of better or worse, because you still haven't defined the word better for me. What makes something better? Define that for me right now.
Having the quality that the majority of people can agree on. So I would say to compare a random modern rap song, okay? Are they singing? No, they're not. They're simply reciting something that they have rehearsed,
You're gonna
okay?
have to be specific with that because most of what you're saying is not true.
Okay, I suppose if you are a very avid fan of rap, so you can appreciate that, but I feel like a lot of people would disagree. You go to some of the most famous pieces like Handel's Messiah. This tells a story and it is actually building throughout it. And it's not simply telling and whining about their lives. And I feel like lyrics nowadays are also a lot lamer than they used to be, which I think is a fair point.
It's all plagiarism technically. He's taking words directly out of the Bible, which is not a bad thing, obviously, but he's not originally writing mo any of his lyrics, all the classical music and all that.
The just noting on the plagiarism, uh, technically, well, actually, I don't know the specifics on the copyright of the Bible, but I don't think there's a specific copyright on who can quote it, where, and when, because it's a compilation
Yeah.
of. Do you have the copyright details up?
No, I'm just saying I understand that, but like what I'm saying is that Handel or whatever, he didn't write his own words. He used words. I'm not calling him out for plagiarizing. I'm just saying. he didn't write his own lyrics.
Yeah. So what I'm going for is that so when Handel sat down and wrote the Messiah, just because that's the song that the piece that is currently being discussed, is he had to imagine each instrument playing its part in his head. He couldn't personally play each of those parts. He had to mentally picture what the orchestra would sound like. It is so that's an enormous mental capability that I think has been lost. However, the um specifically rap, the genius of play on words and stuff like that they have come up with in the recent years is a almost as good replacement for as far as the mental game required for making good music. And when I say good music, I think it's a easy enough standard to go by record records sold or um, Spotify listens or whatever one of these global matrices that allows you to look at the scale on which global viewers are or listeners are enjoying their music.
And Cooper, you also mentioned that lyrics nowadays are getting more lame. Can you define what you mean by that?
Hold on. Before we go into that, I just have to say that this session is going to have to come to an end, and we will reconvene at a future date and maybe continue this one or come up with something new. So we hope to see you back on this channel someday, and let's see, hear your opinions in the comments. It would be great, and we'll see you around.
Peace.